Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for brand new Film Fanatic show. It is 10:12 on a Wednesday morning. Pretty beautiful day. Spring has pretty much sprung. I guess it's safe to say it's a little chilly this morning. I typically, for me, with my music space, this is kind of how I usually, measure the winter season, fall going into winter, and then of course spring. And then where winter feels, even though I've learned to kind of appreciate or kind of enjoy, if you will, winter a little bit more, it still seems like fucking eternity. It really does. Like that gap, that space, that time frame from about like late October, early November till about now, it just seems like eternity. It's crazy. It's the only thing I don't like about Maine, or I should say New England, because it's like that everywhere. But during the summer, it's such a beautiful, beautiful place. The climate, that's my favorite time of year. But it always seems to just go by so quick. But the winter time, it just drags on. But I've learned to appreciate it, I guess, more. I do like the snow. The cold gets to me, but and typically during the winter in my music space, I have a separate building on my property that I have for rehearsals and whenever I teach drum lessons on occasion, and then just for me practicing and writing music, I have a separate building on my property that I use, and I have a little heater in there. But during the winter, my electronics that I use, especially it's mainly stuff that I use for quantum. I have to take that stuff in every night because it gets too cold. I don't like to use electronics or leave electronics in my music space because during the winter it does get cold. But I have a little heater, so usually every morning during the winter I'll go in, in the mid to early morning or so, turn the heat on, and then I have to let the heat go for about an hour, at least an hour before I can go in there. On really cold days, it can be up to 2 hours. And then at night, I'll come back home, after work or whatever, do the same thing, turn the heat on for a little bit, and then go back in there, and then take my my electronic stuff that I use, my drum machine or drum machines, and my keyboard, and take those in every night. So I can't ever leave things in there. Usually during the winter, I usually don't because I've had equipment die that way. Especially with the electronic stuff, it's pretty finicky and pretty sensitive. So, but just a few days ago, I started leaving my stuff in my music space because it hasn't been getting super cold. It gets a little chilly. It was a little chilly this morning when I went in to turn the heat on. And I still have been turning the heat on a little bit when I go in there, but big difference. So that's for me, is a big sign of, wow, it's coming to an end, the winter climate. But anyway, so pretty funny. But that's usually how, a lot of the times, how I measure the climate and all those things. And then yesterday, of course, was St. Patrick's Day. I went over to my folks yesterday for dinner. We had corned beef, cabbage and potatoes, had some beers, and of course watched movies. Great time. And then this week is also my dad's birthday. We're going to be doing pizza night. We've been doing stuff all week for my dad, which has been nice. He is turning 90 years old on Friday, which is crazy. We're going to do pizza night on Friday, and then Sunday we went out for Chinese. We went to this big Chinese buffet, and that was great. And then last time we had dinner. And so every time I go over to their house, I of course automatically always bring a movie. I always go to Opera House Video, get a movie in, and bring it over there. So last night I watched. Well, the movie I brought over was this movie here, Sisu, Road to Revenge, which is the sequel to the first Sisu film, which came out. in 2022. And anybody knows of this movie, I remember seeing this a couple of years ago under the same circumstances. Basically, I rented it at Opera House Video, brought it over there to my folks for dinner. Every time I go over, it's a normal kind of thing for us and a normal tradition for us as a family is to after we have a, a dinner or a meal, we always sit and watch a movie or movies. Typically, like during the week, if I go over there, I'll usually rent a movie, one movie, and then on weekends, if I go over there, if it's on a Saturday or Sunday, I'll usually rent two movies. And if it's on the holidays, I'll usually rent three movies. So we have a bunch of choices, or sometimes four movies. And then if it's like for birthday, it's usually about the same, usually about two movies. So we always watch a shit ton of movies. There was one year, I think it was Thanksgiving or Christmas, actually this year, where we watched like four movies back to back. So, but so last night I brought the sequel over to Sisu, which is a sequel to the original, which is a pretty good movie. It's a pretty good like action film that was kind of under the radar. It's a it's an action war movie. It's about this. It takes place at the kind of the tail end of World War II, and Sisu, who is like the main character, is this expatriate or soldier who was in the Finnish War. He discovers a ton of gold, so he's on the path to become very very wealthy, and to be able to, but in order to get home and to get to a safe space, to be able to live in a in a free way and to kind of escape persecution, he has to fight and kill a whole bunch of Nazis. And basically, the whole movie is him just like slaughtering and killing Nazis during World War II. And it's great. But I don't know. I watched it. It was interesting. I remember watching this movie. It's a pretty underground. Well, not underground, but it's a pretty under the radar film. And it came out like again 2022, and I remember seeing it then with my folks, and we all liked it. And yesterday, when I was at Opera House Video, I saw that there's a sequel out, and I remember hearing about the sequel, and I do believe it came out. Well, it came out last year now, and I do believe it came out like in the fall or the summer of 2025. And I remember my parents especially loved the first one, and I like this. I like the first one too. It was, I remember it being really gritty and just brutally gory, and just, I mean, who doesn't want to see a movie where Nazis are just hacked to pieces and destroyed in every possible way? And it's kind of a revenge movie and the whole thing. So I was like, I remember my folks really loved the first one, and I had only seen the first one once. They bought Sizu, the original, on DVD, so I was like, okay, this will be fun. So I, so I brought that over last night, and my parents got really excited when I was like, hey, look what I got. So it was my dad's idea to, why don't we watch both of them back to back? Watch the first one, Sisu, and then watch the second one. And at first, my mom was like, I don't know if is that going to be too much time, because it was like getting close to, by the time we got done eating, it was about 7:30, quarter to 8 or so. We ate about 6. We had dinner, had a really delicious meal. So, but then we looked up the times for the movies, both movies, and they're each an hour and a half. So we're like, okay, why not? So that's what we decided to do. So we watched both. We did a double header last night. We watched both Sisu films last night, and it was very surprising. So we start off with Sisu, and again, I had only seen this movie one time when it came out, and basically, like how I started off the show, it's a film about this soldier who is living, and he's Finnish, takes place in Finland. It's the tail end of World War II. He discovers all of this gold, and he's trying to like build a life again. All of his, everything in his country's been destroyed. His family was killed all by the Nazis. And when he's trying to escape with all this gold, the Nazis obviously try to capture him and kill him, and then he just proceeds to slaughter every Nazi that comes his way. And this movie definitely has, and again, I had only seen it once. I overall liked it. When I had a good time with this film, and I know I reviewed it when I saw it. It's on the channel. So I figured, well, I'll talk a little bit about Sisu in this video, but the main topic for today's show is Sisu Road to Revenge, the sequel, which came out last year, 2025. So that's going to be the main topic. But it was cool watching, watching both together. I do that sort of thing a lot in my free time, or I should say in my movie, when it comes to my movie habits, especially when it comes to franchises or sequels. I think, a lot of times it helps you can see, well, if you liked, especially in the context, like if you liked the previous films or film, watching the sequel in that context, I think it really can give you an indication if the film really stands up or is cohesive, or if it just completely is ridiculous and terrible. So I was like, okay, that's a cool idea. And watching Caesar, again, I only watched it one time before, and I remember really liking it. And we watched it this time last night. We started it about 7:30 or something. I was into it, and I do like it. I do feel like my attention started to kind of wane a little bit. I don't know. I don't usually fall asleep to films, but I started getting a little bit tired, a little bit fatigued. I felt the film was dragging a little bit more so than I remember from my first experience seeing it, but I liked it. Some of the violence and the gore is brutally it's just brutal and over the top. Automatically, I'm a big fan. The other thing I will say is I do like the character. Sisu himself, or the character himself, is a kind of that silent warrior type. He doesn't say much. There's not very much dialogue. The cinematography in Sisu is pretty cool. It's beautiful. It's all set in the, like, kind of the mountains or the farmlands or the hills and valleys of Finland, or at least it seems like it is. There's not too much. There is a little bit of CGI in the film, but it's hard to tell. It doesn't really stand out. It does seem that there's a pretty good amount of kind of in-camera practical effects, because the movie is balls to the wall violence in some ways. But I liked it. But I did think it dragged a little bit. I don't know. It didn't seem as fun or as impactful for me when I saw it the second time. I thought it kind of dragged a little bit. I thought it got a little bit, and Sisu is this character where he's like this. You find out about his character in the story in both films, of where he is. He was a soldier in the Finnish army, and he killed. He was known to have this unbelievable power. He was like this killing machine, and he becomes almost this godlike figure, and like becomes this folk hero. And you kind of get this sense that he is invincible, but he's still kind of a mortal person in this film, the first one. But he does have this. You do start getting a sense as you watch the movie that he is not a mortal human being. That he does have some kind of superhuman power or strength. In resistance to being shot and stabbed and all these things. And it kind of moves into an area where he's maybe more of like this supernatural person or creature. And he's not really a mortal man. The film is very heightened. It's got this very heightened, kind of over the top kind of reality to it. So, and the other thing that was really cool, which I kind of forgot about watching Sisu, was that it's definitely inspired by grindhouse cinema, which is really cool. A lot of the credits, the way the credits are, the movie's broken up into chapters. Some of the music, some of the kills, even, I would say, very much influenced by grindhouse. So that is something That to me is a check in the box for me. Like, hell yeah. So, but I do. I honestly, I did. I felt like the movie dragged a little bit more than I remembered when I first saw it. I thought it was okay. I thought it got a little bit. I mean, again, it's set in this kind of heightened reality, but there is something about the first movie where it is kind of grounded to a degree. It's not so like it's not. It doesn't feel like it's so heightened that it's like a superhero film where he literally is this superhero. But you kind of get this indication that Sisu and his character and his ability to, withstand, you know, getting shot and killed, and and having all of these odds against him, being outnumbered, and he's able to always prevail. That there's something else going on. Maybe he does have some kind of other power or what have you. You do get that sense. But I don't know. I liked it. I just thought it dragged a little bit. I thought it was a little bit, it got a little bit silly. I love the grindhouse element of the film, or the influence of the grindhouse cinema. I loved the cinematography was really cool. Some of the action's great. Some of the gore and what seemed to be mostly practical effects was very cool. And again, it did have CGI in it, but it was handled pretty well. It didn't stand out so much, so it was decent. So we finished, but I liked it. I liked it overall. I felt like I didn't enjoy it as much as the second time. I'm not sure why. I was kind of fatigued, and I kind of got tired, and I was kind of almost falling asleep. I don't know. It's like that usually doesn't happen, but that for me personally, that's a pretty good indicator as to like what the heck might be going on, or how I really think of a film. Because a lot of the times, if I'm into a movie and I watch it, I could be totally tired and exhausted. I get tired a lot after I eat, but I could go into a movie. There's been lots of examples of that. While I'll sit and watch a movie, whether it's in the theater or at home, and I'm really tired or whatever, and it will like wake me up. And then by 10 minutes, when I get to the 10-20 minute half hour mark, I'm totally awake, and it's like a shot of espresso. That happens a lot when I see a movie that I'm really enjoying. Very rarely does it put me to sleep, but if it does, or I'm like kind of drifting off, that is a pretty good indicator on maybe how I'm really going to feel about the experience of watching that particular film. So, Caesar, the original, is only an hour and a half, just about. So we put in part two. We took like a 2 minute break, pretty much. It was pretty funny, like a little intermission. So we finished Sisu. We watched it again. I I enjoyed it overall, but I don't remember it being. I didn't. I felt like my first experience. I enjoyed it more the first time, which was at least 2 years ago. I felt like it dragged a little bit. It got a little bit lost in the weeds in the woods for me. And again, it's a heightened kind of reality. I did like the action a lot. I loved what seemed to be mostly practical effects. The CGI wasn't too much. There was some CGI. I liked I like the films sometimes that have this kind of slow burn to them, and they have a kind of an atmosphere to them, especially atmosphere. And this film had that because it's not a whole lot of dialogue. I loved the cinematography, and I was kind of into it. And again, it just felt the experience was a little bit less of. I was engaged a little bit more, a little bit less this time watching the movie, but I liked it overall. And I did do a review for Sisu when I saw it, which was on DVD. And then last night, Sisu, the sequel, which I got at Opera House Video, of course, the only video store working or alive, that's alive and well in Maine, went there before work and rented this. And so we had both movies for were pretty much just like an hour and a half. So it was like pretty easy cheesy as far as getting through two movies. So we took after Sisu, after we finished it, we took a little bit of a break, made some popcorn, and then we sat down to watch Sisu Road to Revenge. And just, I guess, just my first thoughts before I kind of talk about the movie more is I have to say this Sisu Road to Revenge has got to be. It, I have to say it was one of the worst movies I have seen in recent time. Easily the worst movie I've seen this year, even though technically it says 2025, but this movie is just a horrendous piece of garbage. I could not believe how bad this movie is. It really. One of the things that I thought that was just so awful about this movie is the overabundance of the CGI. There's so much fucking CGI in this film that it drove me crazy. If I was watching this movie, Sisu Road to Revenge, and again, there's a few years gap between both movies. The first one came out in 2022. This came out in 2025. If I was watching this movie at home, Sisu Road to Revenge, I would not have been able to finish it. I would have taken it out probably at the 45-minute mark. Generally, if I'm into a movie or if I'm in watching a movie and it's just like just a total shit show, I won't make it all the way through. I will usually take it out. If I'm watching it on DVD or Blu-ray, I usually I don't have any hang-ups about that. You know, if I go to the movies, it's a little bit of a different thing because you're paying a little bit more money, and going to the movies, there kind of is this redeemable quality. Like even if the movie is total horseshit or it's just like really, super disappointing, the experience itself of going to the theater and experiencing the movie with maybe a friend or two or a group of friends being in the theater, getting that theatrical experience, to me, that happens. Well, that happens all the time. Even if I have gone, I go to the movies and it's the movie just I feel just sucks. I will still enjoy the experience. Very rarely there has been circumstances where I've walked out of the theater, but where the movie was just so bad that I just walked out. But it's really, really rare. There's only two times that I can think of where I saw a movie, and I've seen some pretty shitty movies in the theater. But the only two times that I can think of that I've done that was I remember going to see Matrix Revolutions, the third Matrix movie, in the theater, and I just could not believe how terrible it was. And I remember walking out of it so disappointed. And then the other movie I think I saw in the theater where I walked out and I was so aggravated and kind of pissed off at how bad it was Superman versus Batman. The director's cut, I will say, is significantly better, which I do recommend. But it's still not it's still pretty flawed, but it's a much better film. Those are the only two times I ever walked out of the theater that I can think of. There's probably been, there's probably been other times or other examples of that. But generally at home, if I'm watching a movie on DVD or Blu-ray, and I'm watching a movie that I just can't get into it, I will take it off. And I usually or take it out. I usually I try to give the movie a chance. I try to be open-minded. I try not to go into a movie with you know real big kind of preconceived notions as to what I think it's going to be, or some movies you have a real big expectation for it. You're anticipating, you're excited to see it. So that's a natural thing, that's a natural thing. And there's times too where it can be really extreme, of where there might be a movie you're really excited for, and you're like, I think I'm gonna like this, and you're kind of sold on it, and then you're watching a movie and you're like, yeah, this is good, this is good, and then a few things happen, and you're like, oh wow, I'm not sure what's going on here, and then it just gets worse, but you're still kind of like hanging on, like, okay, maybe this will get better, and then it doesn't. So that happens. But if I was watching Sisu at home, Road to Revenge, I would have taken it after 45 minutes. The only reason I didn't do that, obviously, I was watching with my folks, so I guess I'm a little bit more of a stickler than they are, maybe of movies or whatever. But they were kind of enjoying it, so I'm not going to do that, of course. There's so many things wrong with this movie. Oh God, one of the things that stood out the most was the overabundance of CGI. This movie is so weird because there's the production value feels, on one hand, it feels the first Sisu, which is a thing that I really liked about the first one, or I shouldn't say really liked, but I liked about it, was that it's kind of it has an indie feel. It feels like an independent film. I loved, again, like I said in the top of the show, that the first Sisu had definitely a big kind of exploitation, vibe. It was gritty. The credits, like the fonts that they use, total kind of grindhouse vibe. The kills, kind of the grittiness, the over the top kind of nature, the grimy aspect, definitely a big part of this of the first one. And I, liked some of what seemed to be mostly practical effects. It's hard to tell sometimes, but I knew I knew there was CGI in the first one, but it didn't stand out. Is basically what I'm trying to say. I felt like, okay, that's mostly what I'm seeing here, especially with the action scenes, because that's what this movie is. It's an action movie, both of these movies. So it's got to deliver, at least, you know, as far as the carnage. The carnage has to be there at least, because that's what this movie's about. Killing Nazis. I mean, who doesn't want to see that? And I felt, yeah, it's mostly practical effects. So I was kind of into it for that reason. This movie, there is so much. Sisu, the Road to Revenge, the sequel, has so much CGI that it's just, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. It took me out of the movie immediately. There's there's a series of these big kind of action set pieces, and again, it's super weird because these films feel like they're low budget and kind of indie films, yet they, especially with the first one, felt like it does have this somewhat high production value. With this one, I I felt like it had, I don't know, in some weird way, I almost felt like it had a lower production value in some ways. And to cut corners, I felt like the filmmakers decided to use more CGI because they might have had even less money for this film. So they used even more CGI to kind of make up for not having as much money. That's what I got. That was my impression. And the CGI in this movie is absolutely fucking horrendous. It is so bad and it's so obvious. There's some scenes in the movie which I don't think there's very many. There's that there, but there's some sequences and some scenes in the film where it's kind of practical effects. It's hard to tell, and it feels like it's in camera, like with the hand to hand combat in this movie. But when there are bigger kind of, there's bigger, more bombastic sets, pieces in this film and action sequences in this movie. There's like an abundance of it where it's all CGI, and it's just like, it's so bad. It's like everything. It's kind of like it's almost like the epitome, or the very reason why I really hate CGI and why I just can't stand CGI. And there's so many examples of where it just goes wrong for me, where it just takes me out of the movie. It's just, I don't understand it. I don't understand the reasoning behind. I think there's times, don't get me wrong, I think there's times for a certain story that maybe because of the scale, they kind of need to use it. And there are examples of where it can be really seamless. It can be blended really well with practical effects. I think, a really great example of that was Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, which came out last year. A lot of in camera, Robert Eggers is known, I mean, he's known as the period piece director, but there's a lot of in camera shots, a lot of camera work, a lot of practical effects in that film. But there's also some bigger sequences in that movie because of kind of the grand scale of the story that he was telling and his version of Nosferatu, where there is CGI. But he is so great at blending in camera and CGI technology. I felt with that movie it was like perfect harmony between those two things. I never felt like, oh my god, it's so glaringly obvious that is completely fucking fake. I never felt that way with Nosferatu. And again, with the story he's trying to tell, a classic, a story that's been told many, many times, and the scale of it, the scope of it, I can understand it being used CGI. But Robert Eggers is a master filmmaker, and he's able to blend all those things. And I don't really think that there was all that much. I think most of the stuff in Nosferatu, what we saw, was in camera. I do believe that, but it was a perfect blending of tech and in camera. Another other examples of that, the first Lord of the Rings films. I think those were great. And there's a lot of practical effects in those films. I think the Avenger films, especially Endgame and then especially Infinity War, which for me is my favorite superhero movie of all time. Tons of practical effects in it. Tons of practical effects in it in actuality, but even more so CGI. But the way it was it was crafted so well, and it looks absolutely spectacular. And you can't tell. I don't think. It's you're seeing this fantasy world, but it's so seamlessly put together that it never stands out. It never stands out like a sore thumb, and you're like, oh wait, that's obviously really, really artificial. And you have that danger as a viewer when you see a film that has CGI, of where, at least for me, when I see a film that has copious amounts of CGI, when it looks so bad and so computer generated, it's gonna take you out of the movie. It's gonna take you out of this world that you're being brought into, and it can be really awful when you're the movie does a good job, pulls you in, you're invested in it, you care about the characters, maybe the script is pretty good or solid, the characters are interesting, you care about everything and everyone, you're interested in the world, you like the atmosphere, and then there might be an action set piece that comes along, and it's like this, big red stop sign of like, wait, this is obviously completely CGI, and it stands out, and it completely cuts off your suspension of disbelief and takes you out of the movie. I see that time and time again, and that's why I really fucking hate CGI. Again, I've listed examples of where I think it can be done in really wonderful ways, but when it encroaches on where, to a point of where this is how you're going to tell your story, no way. Like, you can't you can't you can't really go there because it's going to just ruin the experience. And I think this sequel, there's so many big set pieces, and again, it feels like it's lower budget, and I do feel that it probably was, and to overcompensate for the lack of funds, which I do believe the first one had a pretty good amount of practical effects and in camera, that kind of grittiness to it. To overcompensate for not having maybe a budget or less money, they decided to employ lots of computer generated graphics. And they tried to go at the same time, they tried to get more ambitious. They tried to do these bigger set pieces. Because for the most part, Sisu is it's pretty contained. It's pretty contained. There's not a lot of big giant set pieces or action sequences. It's more around kind of brutal hand to hand combat. But with this, there's planes, there's these big giant sequences involving, mountains and more soldiers. There's tanks. There's all these things, trains. So, but the CGI in this movie is absolutely horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. And Stephen Lang is also in this film. Oh, God. I do. Yeah, I just. Oh. And Stephen Lang is brought on. It's also a return of Jorma Tamala, who plays Sisu. He was in the original playing Sisu, and he's brought back into this film playing Sisu. And then they also brought in Stephen Lang, and this whole film is centered on. It takes place after the original movie, a year, because the first one finishes up with basically he is able to, he kills all the fucking Nazis. He's able to get all of his gold, and then you see him basically getting what he deserves, and he's going to try to like build a life. And then this film kind of takes place a year or so after, and he's like he's building a house again and trying to rebuild his life, because he's starting from nothing. His family's dead, his country's been destroyed. He has this money. And so this film goes into kind of the origins of who Sisu was, brings back this character, and it ties in his connection to when he was a soldier. Sisu was a soldier in the Finnish army, and they were fighting the Russians, and how he kind of developed his reputation. And Stephen Lang is this character in this Russian soldier who kind of created this guy, made him into this beast. Was responsible for killing his family and all of the destruction and obliterating all of Finland. So they bring him in, and he has this. I do like Stephen Lang. I think he's been in some good movies. I mean, Don't Breathe is a fantastic movie. Awesome movie by Fede Alvarez that came out a few years ago. Lately, he's been in all of the Avatar movies, which is whatever. But I do like Stephen Lang, and they bring him into this movie, and he's got this really, at first, he's got this really strong Russian accent, and then there's other sequences where he has no accent at all, and you're just like, what the fuck? Like, clearly, dropped, they dropped the ball with that, and one minute he's got this really strong Russian accent, the next minute he's got his normal Californian accent, his typical American accent. And the other thing that was so weird about this movie, there's a couple of sequences of where they really get into Sisu as a character, or they try to, where now it's so over the top, and there's definitely this realization that he is kind of this, superhuman person. He's way more of like this superhero. He's invincible. You see that he is not really you discover that he's not a mortal man. He can, he can't really die. He's like a force of nature. People stab him, shoot him, kill, hang him, do all kinds of things to him, and he just can't die. So it goes into this, fantasy realm, and more of a supernatural realm. trying to explain his character, where he's not a mortal person, so he does have all of these supernatural abilities. So it's a little bit. It's on one hand, it's kind of believable because they do you do see that in his character in the first movie. But the thing with the first movie is I feel like it has that element, and I was okay with it. But at least it's kind of grounded in some kind of reality. It feels like kind of grounded. This movie is not grounded in any way, shape, or form. It's so over the top. There is no there's not a shred of any kind of reality in this movie where it's grounded in any way. It's essentially they made this into an MCU movie. Obviously, way more violent. They made this, but he's a superhero character. Sisu's character is basically Thor right now. I mean, he's like this immortal god that nothing where nothing can penetrate him, nothing can kill him, nothing can stop him. That's what his character has evolves to in the sequel. So there's no grounded reality, which I felt was really disappointing because it doesn't have any grittiness to it. There's no because he's not human in any way, shape, or form. There's this scene that is so. There's a couple of scenes in this movie again that were just so strange to me. Like how I said, the weird thing of feeling this movie didn't have that feeling of watching this movie and feeling like this movie was maybe even had a lower budget than the first one, and to overcompensate or to make up for that, they decided to throw a bunch of CGI at it to save money because they didn't have any, which is really weird. I don't know how successful the first one was. I know it was kind of a, it's an independent film, kind of under the radar, but it definitely, I did hear a lot of people talk about it. I think it did pretty well. Enough to make a sequel, I don't know. But it felt like they all overcompensated with CGI. The other thing that's so weird is there's a lot of scenes in this movie where Sisu is essentially captured, and they torture him. And the thing that I got, and they put him into this thing of like where it's so weird, but the movie totally reminded me of like, especially when Sisu is captured. I was like, man, this is like Passion of the Christ, like the Mel Gibson movie Passion of the Christ. The whole sequence of where they capture Jesus and where they torture him, and that movie essentially is torture porn. I totally got Passion of the Christ vibes watching this whole sequence of where they just torture him and rip his flesh off his body, and they kind of make him into this like almost like biblical character, like a Jesus figure. He strikes the Jesus Christ pose even at times in this movie. It's really weird. And the whole torture sequence, I was like, this is totally like Passion of the Christ torture porn. Really weird. And just like, and it was clearly all fake. There was no practical effects in this movie. I couldn't see anything that resembled practical effects in this movie whatsoever. And it was all like digital. Terrible, terrible. And the heightened reality, like there's no more reality in this film. It's so over the top where it defines, like in the first movie there's again it's a heightened reality, but there's still like a grounded thing. There's a little bit of logic in that movie and a little bit of practicality, and there's some good practical effects. This movie has none of that. Absolutely none. I couldn't really see any sequences that were practical effects. The big set piece action sequences were pure CGI, and it looked so bad. I'm like, what were these guys thinking making this film? Like I couldn't believe it. So disappointing, and I was like, I can't get into this movie. I have no idea what is going on. And this movie has, again, it's set in this kind of heightened reality, a heightened universe. And the first one has that too, but it still has a grounded base to it to some degree. Something where you can kind of like sink your teeth in to, or understand it. in a logical, somewhat logical way. But this movie has none of that. There's no, it's totally illogical. It's so absurd. It's a case of, again, I've said this many times with movies because I watch crappy movies all the time. But I firmly believe in some in the idea that something can be so bad it's good. I I experience it all the time with a lot of movies that I watch. But in the case of Sisu Road to Revenge, it's so bad it's awful. Take a hard pass on this movie. Don't waste your time. I can't even recommend this movie for people to see on a streaming service. Don't even waste your time. Yeah, cancel, delete, unfriend, unsubscribe. So thanks again. We'll see you next time.